Good day. This is Nancy Grony from the Parapsychology Online YouTube channel, Facebook page, and blog. I am a research fellow of the Parapsychology Foundation, and my late husband and I have been doing these courses since 2015. This year, our organizational team is Brian Williams from the Psychical Research Foundation and Natasha Chisdis from Chisfilm. Since the beginning of this course, the Parapsychology Foundation has always provided us support. I want to thank Lisa Coley, the president of the PF, and Anastasia Demalis, the executive director. Thanks, you guys. Today, we're going to have a presentation from Robb Tilley. Robb is from Parapsychology Australia. His talk today is Apparitions and Ghost Experiences, an Introduction to Haunt Clearing. And today is March 14th. Robb will review a haunt clearing he conducted from 2020 to 2021 in Sydney using surveys, interviews, and recordings to document psychic clearings of apparitions and haunts, and will take questions about his career and his work and the research he's been involved in. Robb has done over 550 haunted houses and poltergeist cases, about a half a dozen of which were possession cases, over the past 35 years. He has also been the public officer for Parapsychology Australia since 1999. He describes his work as psychic clearing of unwanted entities. All three types are dealt with in the same process. He has a lot of craft knowledge, a lot of knowledge of the science, and a lot of very interesting things to say.
It's 10 o'clock in the morning here in Sydney, so I'm wide awake. I left a message for Terry this morning. Apparently he's in hospital. He had a stroke a few months ago. I don't know how he's going, but as soon as I find out, I'll let you know. Well, my talk, first of all, I'm not an academic, no academic qualifications at all, but I've had a whole lifetime of psychic experiences. And I always wondered, why does this happen to me, not to everyone else? And when I joined the Parapsychology Australia group about 40 years ago, our then president, Dr. Michael Huff from University of Sydney, said that he'd had numerous letters from people living in haunted houses and asking us to help. And so it put it out to the room, does anyone know how to do that? And no hands went up, but he said, anyone like to know how to do that? I said, yeah, I'll do that. And so Dr. Huff gave me names and phone numbers of half a dozen mediums. And so I had on-the-job learning. So everything is done psychically. Nothing else is of any use. Okay. I meant to talk this morning mostly about techniques for clearing haunted houses. And the way it simply works is there's the bad spooks, which is the poltergeist or the possessing entity or just the dumb people that are doing the haunting. So there's the bad spooks and then there's the good spooks. And I work with the good spooks. So I'm part of a team and I'm here in the physical world. So I can talk to you now. I can answer the phone and do emails and explain things to people. The first ghost job I ever had was in about 1994, and I met a medium and her daughter at the haunted house in Bankstown, which is a suburb of Sydney. And she was a trance medium. So she arrived with her teenage daughter and a control called Harry. And she walked into the house, psychically scanned the place, described what was going on there. And she said that the house had been built and owned by a Slavic couple, and that this house was the sum total of their life investment. And they were very emotionally attached to it. So when they died, they were still hanging around the house and getting annoyed. So who was this family, mum and dad and two teenagers? Who are they living in our house? And who are these people sleeping in our bedroom? So the problems have been the usual sort of banging on doors and scratching on walls and that sort of thing, doors opening and shutting, but also in the bedroom, the curtain pelmet, the thing that the curtain hangs on, that had been ripped out of the wall twice. And the father of the family, he's an engineer, so he'd screwed the pelmet back up there. And he said, oh, this is all nonsense. He's quite dismissive of it because engineers are usually very black and white. And then one morning he's making the bed and somebody touches him from behind. He turns around and there's nobody there. So who are you going to call? So Marilyn Campling goes into the bedroom, lies on the bed and goes into a trance. Her control Harry puts her into a trance and brings her out of a trance. So we've only been in this house about 15, 20 minutes and here's Marilyn going into a trance in the bedroom and everyone's really shocked. I didn't know what was going on. But anyway, Marilyn was completely successful. And I think what she did was to go into a trance, go out of body, counsel the ghosts and explain to them that they're dead and it's time to go to the light and get the good spooks to come and take them to the light. That's the simple way that it works. And so I phoned the family later in the week just to do follow up, and the mother said, yeah, everything's fine. No more problems, everything's good. But I never want that woman in my house ever again. She'd really scared the family. Now I did several other haunted house jobs with Marilyn, and same thing, very effective. But going into a stranger's house in a trance to do the job, it just scared everyone. So I thought, well, I don't want to learn how to do that, and I don't want anybody else in my body. So anyway, I worked with half a dozen other people, mostly women, and the technique that they use is to they psychically talk to the bad spirits. So the ghosts can read our thoughts, can see and hear us and watch us, and they can you can interact with them if you're psychic. So you can't do this work unless you're psychic. So again, it's a simple process of these mediums would counsel the ghosts, explain to them what's happening, call in the good spooks. The good spooks take care of the bad spooks. The whole job takes about an hour, sometimes 2 hours, and it's all finished. So I thought, well, that's a lot easier way to go, but it still took a couple of hours to do that. Then I worked with one fellow called Simon Wildsmith, and he was the most psychic of all the people I worked with. And he didn't bother with all the counselling stuff. He just calls in the good spooks, let them get on with it, and the job's finished in about an hour without any really hard work. So I thought, well, this is great. So because I've been working with psychics for a while, I think the good spooks must have decided I was worthy of working with them. And so that's how I got started. So all of these haunted house jobs were all dealt with in the same way. In my experience, the only difference between a possessing entity, a poltergeist, and an ordinary haunting is just personality. The poltergeist usually seems to be, well, criminal, difficult people, belligerent, argumentative, and whereas the people doing the haunting are usually clueless. They're kind of lost and they're desperate for someone to help them. And the possessing entities are much worse and narcissistic. You can't persuade them because they can't appeal to their better judgment because they don't have it, any better judgment. So, so that's the way that Simon Wildsmith taught me to work. So when you look at the history of poltergeistry, and I've researched back through all the parapsychology journals I could find, and I found 117 cases in the parapsychology journals. And out of all that 117 cases, there was only one case which was successfully cleared. So the parapsychologists seem to want to have a non-psychic explanation for psychic phenomena. And I think that's where they go wrong. That's why it's just not effective. The one case that was effective was done by Dr. Stafford Beatty in Los Angeles in 1984, and it was called the Kern City poltergeist case. So Stafford Beatty had a medium and her 15-year-old daughter go into the house and clear it. It took a couple of hours. The medium said it was definitely not an exorcism. They just persuaded the lost souls to go to the light. So you see this pattern recurring over and over again. I've just recently read this book here. Can you see that okay? Now, this is worth, if you can get a chance to read this, it's by Sergio Rueda, and it contains the full transcript of a very famous possession case in 1949, on which the movie The Exorcist was based. So I'd always wondered, why is it that the Christian Catholic exorcism is a disaster? And if you read the full transcript, there's 27 pages written by the Jesuit priests of their treatment of this 13-year-old boy. And so after about 3 months and 30 exorcisms, they're getting nowhere. And then they get lucky, the church gets lucky, because the rector of the psychiatric hospital is in St. Louis, I think, and the rector, who's the sort of general manager of that hospital, he's not involved in the exorcism in any way, but he is psychic, whether he knew it or not. He asks Saint Michael, leader of God's army, to come in and deal with the possessing entity. And Saint Mike gets the message, shows up and puts a stop to the possession case. So again, you've got this repeat of the good spooks clearing out the bad spooks. I really think it's that simple. So I hope the younger generation of parapsychologists, those few who do take an interest in hauntings and poltergeists, will do as I did with Lance Storm. Lance Storm is at University of Adelaide. He's a research psychologist there. And we did a study of 30 people who asked me for help to clear their haunted houses. Dr. Storm compiled a 10-page questionnaire. So I successfully cleared 88% of these problems, which included one possession case and a lot of other hauntings with poltergeist features. So in our study, Lance did the statistical analysis and said that nobody in our group was mentally ill, and every one of the 30 people had a history of psychic experiences pretty much lifelong. And so the idea that people are mentally ill is just a nonsense. So it seems to us that it's only psychic people that have psychic experiences. The other 82% of the population don't report these kind of phenomena. So that's, yes, 88% success rate. So what works is this psychic clearing, whereas the Christian exorcism is just a complete disaster. At best, it's not very effective. It usually makes matters worse, much worse. People die, people get killed during exorcism. Professor Sarah Ferber from the University of Wollongong, she did a study on deaths in exorcism, and she identified 30 cases in the last 30 years where people died and been killed during exorcism. So nearly all women and girls, very rare for a man to be involved in this. So I recommend you have nothing to do with Christians. Don't let them in your house. not even one at a time. The way in which these people died is really stupid. There's one case in New Zealand where a young woman, the Anglicans thought that she was possessed by the devil and that they would drive the devil out by holding her under the water. Well, of course, she drowned. There was another case in down near Melbourne where a woman who'd been in and out of psychiatric hospital, a group of Lutherans decided they would squeeze the demon out of her by applying pressure to her abdomen and her chest all the way up to her throat. And the poor woman died of a heart attack. So that's the kind of stupidity you're dealing with. So just avoid the exorcism. Let me have a look at my notes here. I'm wandering a bit. Okay, so what have we got? In reading the research, I was surprised to find that a quick fix for people who are haunted, because it's either haunted people or haunted places, and electroconvulsive therapy, or ECT, seems to work. A psychiatrist that I know told me that she treats her patients always at 6 o'clock in the morning for depression, and they love it. They say they have one shot of static electricity for ECT, and the depression's completely lifted. So what I think is happening there is that the electric shock blasts the entity out of the aura, and then that lasts for some time until the entity comes back again, and then you need some more ECT. So that's one short fix for people who usually report depression. One of the things that Lance and I found in our study was that people living in haunted houses, or people that were haunted, said that it affects their thoughts, mood and behaviour, because when they leave the haunted house, they notice the difference. So that's an explanation for that one. So now I must mention something here about the idea that people are mentally ill. This goes back to a paper published in 1939 by Dr. Nandor Fodor. He published a paper in the American Journal of Society of Psychical Research. The paper was entitled Poltergeist Psychosis, and he claims that using psychoanalysis, he had cured this woman of poltergeist psychosis. So that's where the idea of mental illness comes from 80 years ago. And once that paper was published, then the psychiatrists got involved in poltergeists and hauntings, and then the psychologists followed, and of course the parapsychologists as well. And they're all looking for a non-psychic explanation for psychic phenomena. So this case in London, 1939, two young women, deliberately rent what they knew to be a haunted 300-year-old house in Chelsea. So that tells me that they'd had psychic experiences before and were looking for some more psychic experiences. And inevitably, the one who was the most psychic, Miss Whalen, she gets depressed and then seeks help from Nandor Fodor. He gives her the dazzling psychoanalytic explanation. He convinces her that he's cured her, and her spirits are lifted. She's full of confidence again. And she goes back home and she writes a note which she puts on the door for the poltergeist. Says, "Ring the bell, don't knock the door." So once the poltergeist can't get an emotional reaction from her again, the poltergeist wanders off around London looking for someone else to torment. So we've just got a visitor come in here. Shh. Okay. And so 80 years later, the idea that people are mentally ill still persists. But interestingly, I read a book just recently by Professor Richard Gallagher. He's a psychiatrist, professor of psychiatry at one of the universities in New York. And he's insistent that poltergeists and hauntings not a psychiatric problem. He's a professor at Columbia. That's where he's at. So he's adamant that possession, hauntings, and poltergeistry is not a psychiatric problem; it's a spiritual problem, and well, he goes into details about that. So what else have we got here? One other way that we found of putting an end to haunting and poltergeistry, there was a case here in Sydney I had where a large family, I think they were from Yugoslavia, a large extended family. The senior lady there was an elderly woman who lived alone in a haunted house, and I was asked to go and see if I can help her. Now, she didn't speak any English at all, and so a young man who I think was the sort of head of the family explained to me that she's feeble-minded and she wouldn't help in any way in clearing. She was totally a victim. So we decided, can we swap houses? So the senior man for the family arranged for a house swap where the elderly woman went to live in another house and a young couple went to live in her house. So the young couple were not at all psychic, they were sort of consciously impaired. They said, oh yeah, the house is all right, whatever. And that's how we put an end to that haunting case. The attached to the house. The pot eventually gets bored because it can't get an emotional reaction from the young couple living there. There's another case here where a young woman up on the Central Coast, which is about an hour north of Sydney, she phones me and she's an artist and she lives alone. And she had bought, over the internet, she had bought a doll from a website in London. And so she likes this doll and she's showing affection to the doll. And then after a few days, she notices that the coffee table is starting to slide across the coffee table. And she senses she's being stared at and being watched. There's a sense of presence in the house. So she phoned me, what should she do? And I said, well, if you take the doll out into the backyard and get a hammer and smash the ceramic hands, feet and head, and then set fire to the doll, you sent a clear message to the entity that you want nothing to do with it. And so about a week later, I spoke to her and I said, how did you go with smashing the doll? She said, oh, I didn't. I was too scared. So I asked the local Catholic priest to come in and he smashed it and set fire to it, and all the poltergeistry stopped. That's an interesting case. What else have we got here? In reading some of the books on, one written by Tony Cornell, an English fellow who published a book on his haunted house cases. Now, Tony Cornell was not psychic, so he really didn't have a clue what he was doing. But he claims that just using hypnosis, he would put the focused person, the victim, under hypnosis and all the poltergeistry would stop. Now, he doesn't tell us in the book what the hypnotic suggestion was, but that seemed to work. So, another way of dealing with hauntings and possessions is a case that I had when Debbie Malone, who was one of the women who taught me, she got the job of clearing an old 3-story sandstone building in what was the Callan Park Psychiatric Hospital in Sydney. And the whole campus of this psychiatric hospital is now part of University of Sydney and the College of the Arts. And this particular sandstone building, the workmen wouldn't go in there anymore because they'd had bricks thrown at them and shovels thrown at them and too scared to go in there. So Debbie gets the job of clearing this haunted house, so I tag along with her. And while we're in there, there's no power on in this building, so it's very dark. There's just all the windows are boarded up except for one window at the very end of each ward. So while we're in there, Debbie says she keeps getting repeatedly hit in the face by a male ghost. And so her face is quite red and bruised on one side. But she persists and carries on. So we ask the good spooks to come in. All the females and girls go off to the light without a moment's hesitation. And then we all go home. Well, that night I get attacked by this entity, which Debbie had nicknamed Cattle Prod, because she sensed that he was prodding her psychically with a cattle prod. He's a horrible man. So this went on for several nights. I'd be woken up in the middle of the night. He's right there in my face, extremely angry and trying to scare me. So I didn't know what to do at that stage of my learning. So I phoned Simon Wildsmith in Melbourne and told him about it. I said, well, what do I do? And Simon said, well, next time he does it, in your mind, in your imagination, grab him by the testicles and squeeze really hard. So I did that, and Cattle Prod's not in my face anymore. He's over by the door, looking very anxious and unsure of himself. So I thought, well, violence is an effective form of communication. If you're dealing with someone who's too stupid, you can't communicate with them. They understand violence. And so this Cattle Prod character continued to hang around. I'd see him from time to time. And the other bit of advice that Simon had given to me was, if he persists in your mind, in your imagination, lock him up and put him in a steel cage and drop him off out the back of Pluto somewhere in the cold and the dark. So I did that, and that works. I mean, this makes no sense to the rational mind, but we're dealing here with a real event in consciousness, not something that's happening in this world. So because I'm a soft-hearted man, after 24 hours of Cattle Prod being left in the dark, I said to the good spooks, if you go and stand around his cage and you radiate love and peace and kindness and compassion to him, and if he understands, you can let him out. So about an hour later, Cattle Prod's back and he's nice. He's actually being nice to me. It shows me respect. So he continued to hang around for quite a while. Then one day I was at work, I was driving. I've got a very big van when I used to fix disability equipment and hospital and nursing home equipment. So I'm driving this one day and I sense that Cattle Prod's sitting in the passenger seat watching me drive. And he's enormously impressed with this. He'd never been inside a motor vehicle before. And so he thinks that driving a big van like this is a powerfully masculine thing to do, and he wants to do it. So I said to him, listen, sport, next time you come back into the world, you can learn to do this. He got so excited, he left. I haven't seen him since. So that was about 20 years ago. So I imagine that Cattle Prod's back in the world now, and he's driving one of those big 90-ton road trains that you see from time to time. So that's a case of persuading him to go to the light and reincarnate. The psychology involved in psychic clearing is totally different to the ordinary world we live in. So what else have we got here? Okay. Oh, that's right. Yeah, I had a case just recently. A young woman in West Australia, so she's 5,000 kilometres from where I live in Sydney. She phones up and she's a devout Christian, and she's been having psychic experiences all of her life. And the church has told her to pray to Jesus and pray to God. And she said, I've been praying to God and Jesus all my life, and nothing's happened. So she looked me up on the internet, and then she phoned me. And she's been having This is a lot. And during the sleep paralysis, is very similar to what Professor David Hufford describes in the old hag syndrome, where she's in sleep paralysis. She can move her eyes and think clearly, but she can't move her body. And this sort of entity thing sits on her chest. She can feel the weight of him on her chest, and she's terrified by all this. And, I said, well, leave it with me and I'll psychically, remotely clear this thing off for you. And so that night, I usually wake up at about 3 or 4 in the morning, and that's when the energy is highest. So I tune into this event on the other side of the country. They're 3 hours behind us here, and lock onto this old hag thing and try to hold eye contact with it. And it's kind of stunned. It doesn't quite know what's going on. And I try to communicate with it, but it has no IQ, no intelligence at all. So I thought, oh, well, we'll have to use a bit of violence here. So in my mind, in my imagination, I prod him in the eye several times with my forefinger. And he looks a bit stunned, but he doesn't move. So I thought, okay, next trick is I'll kick him in the testicles half a dozen times. That did the trick. He gets up, goes away, hasn't come back. So this young woman, she's 50 years of age. She said, how is it, Rob? I've been praying to Jesus and God all my life. And in one night, you could deal with this thing. I've never even met you, never been to my home. So she was quite impressed. So in that study that I did with Lance Storm, I think of the 30 cases, 9 of them were done remotely. So that in a situation where to go to some place, it's a day's drive or 2 days drive to get to some place, it's just easier to do it psychically. And if you're psychic clearing a place that's 5,000 kilometres away is no different from clearing something in the next room. It's very similar to remote viewing, except in psychic clearing, you can interact with the entities and get a result. So that was that one type of case there. What have we got? So how did I get into this? Well, ever since I was a schoolboy, I've had psychic experiences. When I was 14, that was 1964, I was at home alone. I think I had the flu or a cold or something. I was in bed upstairs at the back of the house, and I heard the front doorbell ring, and I remember thinking, I wonder who that is. Next thing I know, I'm out of my body. I'm downstairs, stood in the hallway, looking through the frosted glass door on the front door, and I could see the outline of 2 girls. And I thought, I was 14 at the time. I thought, wow, I wonder who that is. I better go and get back into my body, put some clothes on, come down and open the front door. And there were the 2 girls, friends of my younger sister. And that was my first psychic experience, psychic opening, if you like. I had other similar events like that. And then I was walking home from school one afternoon through a park by myself, and a spirit being stopped me on the footpath and told me, this is what your life is all about. It's very, very important, and you'll be doing this when you're much older. And I thought, oh, that's good, that's interesting. So and then after that, when I was 22, the good spooks told me, you're going to be in a very bad car smash in 2 days' time, but you'll be completely unharmed. And that's what happened. So I feel the good spooks are looking after me and protecting me. So when I go into these haunted houses, I've never had a bad experience with all these 550 haunted house jobs that I've done. I'm always very well protected. If we talk about this one very interesting possession case that I did, it was included in the study with Lance Storm. And this young man was about 31 or 32. And this entity's got control of him. And so he has involuntary body movements. And he showed me that the entity had caused him to clench his fists so badly that the fingernails dug into the palm of his hands and were bleeding. And this entity controlled his memory and his emotions, and would often have him say inappropriate things. So poor old Dan had been fired from several jobs for being rude to customers. So he asked for help. And I said, how did this start? And he said that when he was a child living in Blues Point in Sydney, he had a relationship with spirit beings, and it was all sweetness and light. But over time, there's a sort of, he said there's like a grooming process going on. As he got older, this entity got more and more control over him. And so he got to the point where he is now, or was then. So I thought, well, what can we interview this entity and see if we can appeal to his better judgment? So another fellow who does psychic house clearings, a member of Parapsychology Australia, Ian Denker and I had an interview with Dan where we would ask the questions and Dan could hear the responses from this entity who we called Peter. And so we spent about 3 hours having a four-way conversation with this entity, and this entity, malignant narcissist, absolutely no compassion, no shame, no guilt at all. 3 hours of talking to him. Ian Denker is a much more forceful interrogator than I am, but after 3 hours, we were just exhausted. And, well, this is a waste of time. We're not going to be able to appeal to this entity's better judgment because he doesn't have any. So I thought, well, how do we deal with this rooster? And I decided that what we've got to do is give him an overwhelming emotional transformative experience, something he's never experienced before. So I ran this idea by the good spooks and they said, yeah, let's do that. So I always meditate for about an hour every morning. So on this particular morning, after I'd meditated, I thought, well, let's knock this entity over. So I was able to lock onto him quite easily because I got a memory of him. And before I got to this point, one of the times when I was talking with Dan, holding eye contact with him, suddenly Dan's eyes change and this entity is in Dan's body staring at me, trying to frighten me. And I must say, it was quite a chilling experience. And I said to myself, is this Dan doing this? I thought, no, I trust Dan. This must be the entity trying to scare me. So I decided we'd lock onto this entity, and it was easy to find. So then the entity experiences being surrounded on all sides, above and below, by about 200, 300,000 good spooks. And they're all radiating love and peace and kindness and compassion. Now, this entity had never had experience like this before. He didn't know what was happening to him. He was completely overwhelmed. He wouldn't look me in the eye this time. He slumped over and moved off into the middle distance. And I said to him, I'll finish with you, sport. If you want any more help, you can get it from the good spooks. So after that, I made notes in my diary. I phoned Dan and left a message for him. And about 3 weeks later, Dan phones in and says, he's gone. Oh, good. And when did he go? About 3 weeks ago. So that's a clearing that's all done totally in consciousness alone. One of the interesting things that Dan said about this entity was that we were talking about the grooming process, and he said, yeah, this entity, Peter, was homosexual. So it seems that, so Dan's fine. This is about, I don't know, 10 years ago now. Dan's been fine ever since. So that's another way of clearing these haunts and poltergeists. What else we got? boy, the case that Terry Olsen was involved in. Terry lives in Brisbane, which is about 800 or 900 kilometres north of Sydney. And this particular weekend, I happened to be in Brisbane with a film crew. A filmmaker had got a grant from the British Society for Psychical Research, and we were following up on a reincarnation case with a little boy on Surfers Paradise who speaks Uzbek. He's only a little kid, hasn't started school yet, but his mother, who's a school teacher, had worked out that he's speaking Uzbek, the language of Uzbekistan. And this kid is very, very psychic. So a very interesting reincarnation case. So we're up there in the morning with a film crew filming this little boy. And we had with us Professor Kado Masayuki from Chubu University in Japan. And Professor Masayuki is professor of languages. And he was absolutely convinced that this kid is a real reincarnation case. So in the morning, we're doing reincarnation case. In the afternoon, we're in Brisbane doing a poltergeist case. This case is interesting in that the whole family was psychic. Dad was a New Zealander, grew up on a farm and sheep farm in New Zealand, and he was having experiences at a preschool age where these entities would talk to him, and he tried to talk to his family about that, and nobody could understand him. So he's a very independent-minded young man, and he hitchhiked all around the world on his own, and everywhere he went, this entity would follow him. And again, over time, the level of control exerted over him increased. Now, this man, Kevin, he's an interstate truck driver, and truck drivers are a very tough lot. So he'd be driving his 90-ton road train from Brisbane down to Melbourne full of fresh fruit and vegetables. This entity would be trying to grab the steering wheel and pull him off the road. So this has been going on for all of his life. And he'd never told his wife or kids about this. He always was sort of ashamed and kept quiet about it. So I didn't know about this when his wife had phoned up one day and said, "Oh, we've got our house is haunted. We've got little children in the house." And I said, "How do you know that?" And she said, "I could hear them laughing and giggling and running around the house." So I said to her, "Have you got any chocolate in the fridge?" She said, "Yeah, I've got a bar of chocolate there." So well, I said, "Put the chocolate out for the little kids." I said, "Have you got any crayons and paper? We'll put that out for the kids and ask the kids to do drawings, do sketches of things on the paper with the crayons." And that was happening. And then next time the mum looks at the bar of chocolate, there's two little teeth marks, like a kid who's only got two front teeth. He's sunk his teeth into the chocolate and scraped some chocolate out of it. Now, she photographed that and texted it to me. So they're having all these experiences, and then things just got worse. They had a daughter who's about 12 or 13, and she's experiencing poltergeist phenomena at home and at school in the classroom. And she's going to a Catholic school, and the other girls are making fun of her. So she didn't want to go to school anymore. So her mother's making excuses to the school. And this has been going on for months, and mum's just about run out of excuses. And the federal government Department of Community Services is about to get involved in this case. And why isn't the girl going to school? And I thought, well, this is the last thing you want. So I mentioned this to Terry Olsen. Now, Dr. Terry Olsen worked most of his life in the school system. So, I said to the mother, "Do you need to go and see Dr. Terry Olson, so you need to get a referral from your doctor. And so she said, but what am I going to tell the doctor? And I said, well, just tell him the truth. She said, what? No, just tell him the truth. I can't do that. Well, tell him the truth. So she went to see the doctor, explained what was happening. I said to her, how'd you go with the doctor? She said, oh, he didn't say anything. His eyes were wide open, but he gave me the referral. So the referral was to a tribunal of psychiatrists, where she and her daughter attended this tribunal. She phoned me and said, we've just been diagnosed as paranoid schizophrenic. She was in tears, really, really bad scene. And so I said, well, you tell the tribunal that you want to see Dr. Terry Olson. He's a psychologist. Here's his phone number. So she was able to make an appointment with Terry. Terry said the first thing is to get this girl starting to go back to school 1 or 2 days a week. So we were very lucky there that that got the Department of Community Services off their back. Terry wrote to the school, said this girl's under my care from now on, no more questions from the school. So in the meantime, the truck driver father, Kevin, tells me about this entity, so I'm able to lock on to this entity that's trying to kill Kevin. And it was a very demonic looking thing. You couldn't get a clear image of it, and I couldn't understand why. It was humanoid, but I saw on television just the other day an interview with a man who's the leader of an outlaw motorcycle gang. And this man's face is totally covered in tattoos. His head's covered in tattoos. So when you try to look at this man, your eye is confused by the different tattoos and colours and patches on his face. So you can't get a clear impression of his facial features. And that's very similar to this demonic thing that was trying to kill Kevin by driving him off the road. So I said to the good spooks, can you deal with this, Rooster, because it's a bit beyond my ability. I spoke to Kevin a few days later and he said, yeah, the demonic thing's gone. Ah, good. No, I didn't ask any more questions. Kevin was a bit reticent to talk about it. So the good spooks wouldn't let me see what they'd done to this entity for a few days, and then they let me have a look at him, and they sort of immobilized this entity, so he's looking a bit catatonic. He can move his eyes and he can think, but he can't cause any trouble. I thought, well, that's handy. So once Kevin was free of this entity and the girl's going back to school again, and things settled down. So that case went on with the poltergeist in the house for some time, mostly because the mother and the daughter were both terrified and fascinated by all the poltergeistry that's happening in the house. And so I thought, well, the only way this poltergeistry thing can end is when mum and the daughter eventually get tired of it and they lose interest. And once the entities no longer get an emotional response, they'll wander off and leave them alone. And that's exactly what happened over time. So the filmmaker Sam Bright and I are planning to go up to Brisbane again soon to follow up on the reincarnation case with the little boy and to meet with the family again. So this documentary film should be available Monday soon, I hope. Another case that I had with a really demonic entity, again, that looked like this thing that was haunting Kevin. A woman phoned me from Mittagong, which is an hour or so south of Sydney, and asking for help. And the demonic looking entity that was with her, while I was talking to her on the phone and remote viewing what was happening there, I could see the entity. And the good spooks just vaporized the entity in an instant, just zapped him with a blast of energy, and all that was left was just like a wisp of smoke, something like that. I thought, wow, they didn't muck about at all. They just dealt with it. So it turns out the woman was involved with these demonic entities, and she couldn't decide if she wanted to be a good person or a bad person. She told me she was seeing a Catholic priest every day, and this priest has a psychology degree. I thought, well, good luck. So I told her, look, if you can't make up your mind, if you want to be helped, you have to decide you're going to be a good person or a bad person. I can't have anything more to do with you. Okay. What else have we got? Okay, I think I've talked enough. I've been rambling a bit, but I feel a bit anxious. So, Nancy, do you want to open up for questions now? Nancy?
Yeah, definitely. If anybody has any questions, you can put them in the chat, or if you would like to open your mics and ask a question, that you can do that too. Brian was going to take over the question and answer, but my earbuds decided to work, so I've been able to hear everything you said, which is really wonderful. Well, I was interested in what was the first time you had an experience of taking care of a problem with an entity, because you were talking about how you were psychic as a child and all of those experiences, but the very first time that you actually were engaged in rescuing or moving away some entity that wasn't positive for the people around it, what was the first experience you had doing that?
Well, most of the haunted house jobs that I've done are really simple. So I just used Simon Wildsmith's approach, which was to the family usually phone up. It's been happening for a year or two. They're in crisis. So I arrange a time to go out there when the family's there. I say to the good spooks, we're going to this woman's house Tuesday night, 7:30, be there. I get to the house, I can sense the good spooks are already there. They have a distinct energy signature. So then I go through the process of getting to know the family, getting them to explain what's been happening. Then I'm explaining to them how I'm going to do it. Meanwhile, I've got sort of divided attention. I'm talking to the family, and I'm also watching what the good spooks are doing. And it's really easy. The good spooks don't waste their time talking to anyone. They just flood them with emotion. So the people doing the haunting are usually confused and scared and frightened. So the good spooks flood them with an emotion that assures them that everything's going to be fine. Nobody's going to get hurt. Nobody's going to be punished. The good spooks are the white ones, the shiny white ones, go with them to the light. And it usually takes less than an hour. And the job's all done. And you can sense when the job's done, because the mood in the house, the energy in the house lifts, and everyone's aware of it. They can feel it. And the family usually says to me, yeah, it's all finished. I can feel the house is clear now. It feels wonderful. So it was really quite simple. And nearly all the jobs that I've done are just like that, quite simple. I've only mentioned the more complex ones, which are a bit more tricky. So it's really no big deal, Nancy.
Leah was asking, you said shock therapy drives an entity out. After the shock therapy, why does the entity come back to possess the person? And what are the personality characteristics that cause the possession or the repossession?
Oh, well, in the electroconvulsive therapy, it's really only effective for spirits that are attached. And these are usually often dead family members who've still got a grievance or a dispute with the living person. So they express their depression, their anxiety, their emotion. They project onto the individual, and so the individual notices that their thoughts, mood, and behaviour are influenced. So everywhere this person goes, these attached spirits go. So a quick blast of static electricity knocks them out of the aura, and that lasts for several months. So it's a very quick fix for depression. But unless the individual is willing to deal with the entities, and they could do that through a technique called spirit release. And I don't do any of that. I score very poorly on persuasion, and I'm not trained in psychotherapy. And I know from psychological testing that I score very poorly on persuasion. So I think, well, I like Simon Wildsmith's technique where the good spooks do all the persuading and I'm just answering questions.
Yeah, it seems to be a very more of an active intervention than a psychological one. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I just explained to the family because they're often quite confused and anxious, and I answer all their questions. And then as soon as the energy in the house comes up, everybody feels good. And they say, yeah, it's over. And then after a week later, I phone them up a few days or a week later, or I might wait for them to call me and just confirm that, all the problems have stopped.
And Simon's work, were you reading about it, or do you know the person? Did you go through training with him or someone who was using his method?
Oh, I just happened to meet him accidentally or coincidentally.
Ah.
It was a coincidental thing. I think it was one of those destiny things. I was working at a place and got talking about what I do, and it was obvious to me that he knew far more about what I do than I did. I said, well, look, I've got some more haunted house jobs. You want to get involved and teach me? So it's on-the-job training. I don't think you can do this. It's helpful to read everything, and I've read everything in the English language on poltergeists that I can get my hands on, so I'm sort of knowledgeable in that way. But to do this kind of work, you really need to be psychic, so you can see with your mind, you can see the ghosts, you can read their minds, you can read their emotions, you can antagonize them, stimulate them, threaten them, and get a response out of them. You can't, if you're not psychic, you can't do that.
No, right. Yeah, and so many. I thought it was well taken, the point that you made about the general parapsychologists in the scientific side, that an awful lot of us haven't had any experiences and aren't very gifted in some of these things, and don't understand that it's important to have someone around who's got that ability. Lloyd Auerbach, who's going to be speaking for us on Friday, always would take a medium around with him. He always had people that he really trusted and worked with. And I mean, I'm one of those people that has had a minimal amount of experiences, but I do have senses of presence, and I know what it means to walk into a house that suddenly doesn't have that presence anymore. So I could see where you really do need to do kind of a craft apprenticeship with somebody that's a master and have that on the job training, as you were saying, because of the complexity, and then of having those shared experiences as well. So that makes a lot of sense.
When I first started, the half dozen women who taught me that I worked with, they'd explained to me what they were doing, but I found it utterly bewildering, because you need a logic system to do this kind of work. If you're trying to solve this problem using orthodox psychology, you just end up with a big muddle.
Well, and it's the wrong person, right? I mean, if you're focusing on the entity around the living individual, and you're trying to psychotherapeutically put that living person in a state of not being in that experience, it's going towards the wrong person in a sense. Yeah, the receiver rather than the actor.
It's interesting that I mentioned earlier that case, the poltergeist psychosis case in Chelsea in London. If you read through the British Society Psychical Research and the American Society for Psychical Research, you'll see that prior to 1940, if someone wanted help with a haunted house, and the job was given to someone like me,
Mhm.
someone who was known to be effective, and so that, and then in 1940, all the psychologists and psychiatrists and psychoanalysts hijacked the debate, and so from then on, you've got parapsychologists who all have PhDs, but they're using a logic which is not of much help in dealing with entities. Interestingly, in the most recent Mindfield magazine, there's a Lloyd Auerbach was involved in a case in California where they were successful, but using orthodox means that there's a teenage girl involved and her phone keeps dialing 911, which in America, is that the phone number?
That's the emergency. Yeah, that's the emergency thing.
The Pulse is sending her a message, 911, I need help. But
yeah.
the parapsychologists completely miss that. So they just orthodox psychological techniques and they ignore the Pult. And after several months, the Pult just wanders away. He's given up. Because I can't get any help from these people. I'll try somewhere else. And so, the parapsychologists can claim success. Well, they ended the poltergeistry case, but the poltergeist is still wandering around causing trouble.
Looking for somebody else.
Leah,
go ahead.
So in the process that I've been taught, there are no losers, everyone benefits. So this entity has its emotional and spiritual intelligence increased, its IQ increased, and they come back into the world as a better spirit being. So there are no losers in this process. That's what I like about Catholic exorcism. There's only one.
Oh my God, that's a terrible story that you told. I mean, I knew that they were ineffective, and that occasionally people were harmed, but it sounds like very more often than not, there's true harm to the focus of the experience.
Yeah. There's the Vatican runs a course for where they train exorcists, and they was the Father Gabriel Amort, and he died in 2016, but he was the Vatican's chief exorcist. And he done 160,000 exorcisms in his life.
Oh, Mother of God.
But then baptism is a form of exorcism, so you don't quite know what he's talking about. Anyone will tell you with numbers like that, you've got to get lucky once in a while.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Leah is asking, what is your opinion of the Gyra poltergeist? Guyra? That's not one I've heard of.
That case, Gyra is not far from, it's a day's drive from here. I don't remember the details of it too much, but I think it's pretty much a routine poltergeist thing. How did that end, Leah?
Yeah, Leah, you want to turn on your mic?
Yeah, hi. She moved town. She moved to Armadale.
Yeah.
And I think she died there in the 1980s. So what it was a case in Gyra, which is a town about an hour's north of Armadale, where University of New England is here in Australia. And it was a young girl, a family in a house. In the house, they experienced your typical poltergeist phenomenon, knocking in the walls, stone throwing, etc. There's a lot of reports. There's reports written by the local police. It's written up in the local papers. Interestingly, I'm just going from memory here. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's Offsider, does that make sense? Was in Sydney at the time, and he went up and had a look at this because he was interested in paranormal things at the time. So there's his writings as well. But yeah, the family, I don't know that it was resolved, except that they moved to Armadale. She grew up and she died in Armadale, I think in the 1980s or early 90s. She was actually hit by a car on the highway going into Armadale. So that's all I know about it. I wish I'd actually, when I was studying at Armidale, I wish I'd actually read about it before I was studying at Armidale, so I could ask some people about it. But yeah, it was a very interesting case, one of the most famous Australian cases.
Yeah, well,
I'll
of
find
course,
a link. I'll find a link to it and put it in the chat.
Oh,
okay,
thank you.
of course, they used to teach parapsychology at the University of Armidale, University of New England, Armidale.
Ah,
Owen taught there for many years, and
yep.
Yeah, and Adam Rock is still, I think he's still there. He was one of my psych teachers, and Harvey Irwin as well. Yeah, at Armidale.
Oh, very lucky you guys.
how did it end, Leah? Did it just peter out and there was no more poltergeistry, or what? Do you know how it ended?
I'd have to read up on it, but I'm not sure whether when the family moved to Armidale, whether there was whether the phenomenon continued or not. It's very long, you know, because there's so much writing on it. You know, there's a lot of people surmising about it at the time. So yeah, and it's been a couple of years since I read it, so I don't know. I think it just petered out. I don't know that there was any intervention at all.
Yeah. So it's usually it's only psychic people that report these experiences, and so if whoever was doing the poltergeistry, maybe they've wandered off somewhere else and become a nuisance to somebody else. I think so. I mentioned here, Nancy, if you go on YouTube, Parapsychology Australia is a presentation that Lance Storm and I did at our last mini conference a couple of years ago.
Oh, wonderful.
Look that up there, and I think if you go onto the Parapsychology Australia website, there's videos of me clearing a psychiatric hospital and a couple of
I
other
will
things.
look for it definitely, because we're trying to pack the description with additional materials, and that would be wonderful. So I'll see if I can find it and we can put it in the description.
Okay.
I have another question, if you don't mind. One is Randy was wondering, what are your thoughts about the place memory idea for hauntings and for poltergeist cases where it's not an actual entity, but it seems to be something that's just in the area? Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, interesting.
Okay. Place memory. Yeah.
Yeah.
I live next to the 200-year-old Gladesville Psychiatric Hospital on Bedlam Bay. And there's a lot of historic sandstone buildings there. It's not a hospital anymore, but when you walk the place, it is very creepy, I can tell you. It's been a lunatic asylum or a psychiatric hospital. It's the first psychiatric hospital in Australia. So when you wander around there, you pick up the vibe on the place. There's one section there where the criminally insane were locked up in tiny, and the emotion that's attached to the sandstone there is despair, utter despair. And each time I go around, I try and clear off some of the entities that are there. So that's true. And I've read that people who have other people's body parts in them, so you've got somebody else's heart, somebody else's lungs, the recipient reports having the likes and dislikes of the donor. So like a food they wouldn't eat before, or they like jazz music, which they never liked before. So it seems that memory is stored in body tissue as well as bricks and mortar. And part of the house clearing process would be if a house has been haunted for a long time, boarding houses and nursing homes are the worst, I think, and that's psychiatric hospital. Then the longer it's been haunted, the more difficult it is to clear, because there's even more entities are drawn to it, attached to it. So it's another case. There was one day I went into a telephone shop just up the road here to buy a battery for my phone. I walk into the place, and the young man there is, I instantly picked up, this man is big trouble. And I walked out of there without buying anything. Later, I read in the local newspaper that he'd been shot, been murdered in his own shop. Apparently he was a drug dealer and hadn't paid his bill. So on Friday afternoon, somebody went in there and tied him up with telephone cable, shot him in the stomach a few times and rolled him over and shot him in the back of the head. So that shop was empty for a good 20 years, I think. It's all been demolished now. The whole row of shops has been redeveloped. But you could imagine if you went into that new development where that powerful emotion had occurred in that part of whatever shop is there now, you'd still get shivers up your spine, make your hair stand on end.
Yeah.
So whenever we've done a haunted house job, I always get the good spooks to go and change the energy in the house. So the energy stored in the carpet and the timber and the bricks and mortar. So you have them change the energy, lift the energy of the house. That way it doesn't invite any more bad spooks in, because they go there and they only are drawn to places like Gladesville Psychiatric Hospital because like attracts like. They feel despair and depression, and there's plenty of despair and depression in places like the old psychiatric hospital. So, and also,
go ahead.
People who do psychic women who do psychometry, where you give them your car keys and you don't know this woman from a bar of soap, but she can describe your type of car, where you live, all those kind of things. So definitely place of memory stored in things. In the example of that doll, that young artist woman who bought the doll, so that doll had been treated in a place where there was lots of ritual, demonic, satanic things going on. The memory of that place and those activities stored in the doll, so that when she gets it sent to Australia and starts showing affection to the doll, it activates and attracts bad spooks. So when you destroy the doll by burning it and smashing all the ceramics, you've destroyed that energy. So it's definitely something, in my experience, there's definitely something in that.
Yeah, definitely. Brian will be giving a talk about place memory later on. Brian, speaking of Brian, he found the YouTube link to your talk with Lance about hauntings and poltergeist clearing. And someone else found Cal Cooper's paper on the Gyra ghost in the Australian journal Parapsychology. And then Honora is saying, I knew a gentleman who worked down in Mexico who was friends with a First Nations medicine man who could clear organs before transplants. I think the Taoists also clear them. I hope that's permissible. I think that's a wonderful idea. There is a couple of articles and books out there, as you were saying, about people who get organ transplants and suddenly have much different interests in types of music that they never were interested in before, and food and all of those kinds of things. And then Brian also says Tony Healy and Paul Cropper devoted a chapter 10 in their 2014 book, Australian Poltergeist. So we'll put all of that into the description under the video as well. So I wondered as you were getting trained up, how were you learning to protect yourself? I mean, you talk about the good spirits being around you, and that's a level of protection, obviously. But were there ways of being when you were doing your work that also helped you stay safe?
I didn't have to bother with any of that because the good spooks told me when I was a schoolboy, this is what you're like. I've been protected all my life. Remember, they warned me of that car crash 2 days in advance. And, so I never have to worry about that. I never get scared or I never show any fear because I know that I'm really well protected. I'm protected to the extent that in some cases where people have asked me to help, the good spooks won't get involved. I can't get operation. So for some reason, they don't want me involved in that, whether that's for my safety or because it's going to be a waste of time. I don't know. So I can't do the clearing without their cooperation.
That's interesting. Leah has another question. She said, did you have anything to do with the Humpty Doo case?
Humpty Doo, no, I wish I had been involved in that. That was a fascinating case. The Channel 7, the television station, they just trashed the whole thing. Dealing with media is very,
very difficult.
I get requests from radio and television all the time, and I just refuse because you have no control over the editing and how they present. So I've done this documentary with Sam Bright. He's an independent filmmaker, and I used to teach how to clear haunted houses at Macquarie Community College in Sydney. Did that for some time, and this one time, there's one student I've got, and this young man's about as psychic as a block of wood. And I thought, what's he doing here? So he approached me later on and said, look, I'm an independent filmmaker, and I just wanted to check you out to see if you're fair income. And do you mind if we make a documentary film about you and your work? So we've done that. It's about 3 or 4 years worth of cases that we're involved in. So hopefully that there was one very serious possession case we're involved in, which we had no success at all. The woman was determined that she didn't want to get well. She's on a disability pension. She's in her 50s. She doesn't speak English very well. She doesn't have to work. She's got a nice apartment right in the Rocks district of Sydney, close to Circular Quay. So she's got a huge secondary gain in being sick. If she gets well, she'd have to get a job. Who's going to employ her at her age with her language skills? So she triumphantly says on camera, even Robb Tilley couldn't help me. The psychiatrists were right. So we've got that on camera somewhere. So hopefully when we get this documentary finished, you'll be able to watch that.
It's always amazing when you get somebody from the media that actually has a serious point of view. I think Lloyd Auerbach, I think, has had more luck than some folks because his father and brother were producers, right? So he knew his way around media. But Corliss and I, my late husband and I worked at the Parapsychology Foundation on site from the summer of 1999 until the spring of 2003. And it was always interesting watching folks kind of swan in and want everybody to do whatever, and without any kind of understanding of what they were going to do with the film. And the Coley family had many, many years of that, and we're really good at finding the serious folk and politely taking the other folks to the door, because you just can't win with an awful lot of media.
Well, I've always been very careful. Sam Bright, I said to him, yeah, I'll do the documentary with you, but it's got to be straight documentary, no EBGB music or weird stuff. So he and his crew, they're all a good bunch of people. We've done it straight documentary. And the same with, if you go to the Parapsychology Australia website, there's a film there of me clearing part of Callan Park, and that was done with a team of film and television students. They wanted to do their final piece for graduation. They wanted to do it on me, so they were able to get access to this psychiatric hospital, and they were nice young people, and they did it straight documentary. So I said, yeah, if you do it straight documentary, I'll do it. But I just avoid the media. Even, they're all just a bunch of users. I found that some radio station phones up and they've got 11 minutes in the day that they've got to fill with something. So would I like to do an 11-minute interview? Well, no.
Right. Yeah. Oh my goodness. Well, we're almost to the 90-minute mark. Is there something you want to leave us with, something that you haven't said yet, or that you have in your notes that you didn't touch on? We're very happy to have you, I must say.
Okay, I think just looking through my notes, I think I've pretty much covered it. I did ramble a bit. I'm usually a bit better organised, and I just feel a bit anxious at the moment. So,
No, it was quite wonderful, I think. Very interesting. I'm so glad my earbuds came back.
in the future, the generation of parapsychologists who, like William Roll and all the others, they hadn't got a clue really. They didn't understand the most basic thing, that the people who report these poltergeist cases are psychic. They never seem to have grasped that point. But that generation's now died, and so hopefully the younger generation will replicate what Lance Storm and I did, where you get someone who's got psychic ability like me, and you do a study of, they clear 30 houses and you look at the results. If that's replicated enough times, perhaps in the future parapsychologists will just say, well, it's all done psychically. Dr. J.B. Ryan made parapsychology acceptable to science because he never went down the spirit path, because he knew he'd be ridiculed by science, and that it's almost like the ghost of J.B. Ryan persists in parapsychology.
I think you're absolutely right that there is definitely an enormous well of ambiguity when it comes to the phenomena. People are very interested in the phenomena, but they also don't want to get too far into the phenomena, because then your objectivity goes away. On the other hand, you lose the sense of the experience, and you're losing an enormous amount of information about what's going on around you. So I agree. I hope that these days things are on the mend. When Corliss and I first started out, being interested in spontaneous cases was just in general was kind of considered to be sort of silly. What was funny about it was when the older folk would be talking about what we should be thinking about, all the young guys and girls who were coming up were talking about the spontaneous experiences. So I think there's a movement towards understanding that the world is much more complex than your average scientist is going to admit to.
I think a lot of the thinking that parapsychologists have about poltergeistry is based on very few cases where there's an adolescent girl usually as the focused person, but in our study, with average age was a person of age 50. So, and then I've found over the years that very few cases involve teenagers at all. Very few.
We were actually talking about that with Fatima Machado from Brazil, and I think in possibly Jerry Salton's conversation too, this notion that we come in with these preconceptions, and then that's what we look for, is the person that fits the descriptions from 20 years ago, or your favorite writer or whatever, without being able to kind of see that this is something that needs to be, I think even Gerhard Meyer was talking about this, that you need to look at it with new eyes. You need to be able to kind of take it all in, and keep it in mind. I actually asked Gerhard if he felt that there was consciousness in the people that the people that people are seeing psychically, whether they're the poltergeist or they're the apparition at the center of the haunting or whatever. And he was saying he always keeps that in mind whenever they investigate something, is who that person might be and what would their motivation be. And I found that to be really interesting, and it's actually coming up in some of our lectures more than I expected. And I originally had hoped to do one similarly, but I didn't have any I didn't have the time, but I also don't feel like I know enough to talk about that. But I recently had that experience of rereading the Cheltenham Ghost, the extended information that Andrew Mackenzie put together, that showed that the person at the center of that was being seen for decades, if not almost 100 years, even outside of the house that she started in. And it just hit me like a ton of bricks when I was reading that here is this person who's been investigated for 100 years, and nobody cared about why she might have been there and what she wanted if she was in there, kind of a thing. So I think there's more understanding about that, but it's still a minority point of view, and it's something that hopefully will not be such a minority point of view on our side of the research in the future.
Yeah, I know that in Sydney, I didn't have any trouble contacting half a dozen people who do what I do. I keep a very public profile because I don't mind. I haven't had any criticism from mental health.
That's wonderful.
People who do the kind of work that I do, they're very, very almost secretive about it. They don't advertise. And just very low profile. But the people that taught me would have a similar success rate as I did, the 88% success rate. So there's lots of people out there who've got the experience who can tell you what I've told you. So if parapsychologists were to research that, I think you start to get sensible answers. I think parapsychology has evolved to a point now where they can say, look, it is all psychic. It is all done psychically. There are ghosts of the dead. And this is confirmable by, there's a vast amount of literature on it. And whether you like it or not, that's the situation.
Right, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Well, I want to say thank you to you, Rob. This was really wonderful, and a really good lead into where we're going and some of the other things that are going to be happening this week and next week. And I know that the folks in the audience have been very interested in this, and we've got a bunch of Leah just gave us another YouTube channel about the Humpty Doo poltergeist and what happened to that. We will have a lot of really interesting things to put into the description. And if you think of anything after we're not together, or if you come to another presentation and have things to say, we're just delighted that you agreed to come and that you've done this for us. And it's been a wonderful experience talking to you. And I just want to say thank you very much.
You have to thank Terry Olson. He got me into this.
Oh, did he? He seemed to be so enthusiastic. I was so sorry to hear that he wasn't going to be able to be here. But actually, we should have had both of you on different days so we could get 90 minutes from both. So really, really excellent. When you talk to him the next time, tell him that we are all thinking about him and hope he's going to be well soon.
Okay.
Well, thank you, Rob, and thank you everybody who came this evening. And let me share my screen just for a minute so that I can say who's coming up next. Okay, so let me get past Rob's abstract. And the next person up in the Paramook 2023 is Timothy Hart. His talk will be a journey through the history of apparitions, hauntings, and poltergeists, and an introduction to MESA, a multi-energy sensor array for field investigations. It'll be tomorrow, March 15th at 3 p.m. Central. A little bit about his talk. MESA is a computer system specifically designed to measure energies associated with haunt and poltergeist phenomena. He has measured over 250 sites since 1994. MESA measures include infrared, visible light, ultralight, vibration, electromagnetic fields, RNGs, barometric pressure, humidity, and temperature. He's going to present and discuss preliminary findings of his and his group's work with MESA. after a review of the timeline of reported apparitions, hauntings, and poltergeists. So we hope to see you there. Thanks again, Rob, and don't miss tomorrow. Bye now.